Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement, getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, and Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on us authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
Hey there, Festival of Storytellers. JOAB Stieglitz here, and tonight I'm going to do some readings from each of my books. Well, I should say tonight, and I'm going to start readings from some of my books, and the ones I don't get to, I will do on Wednesday night. Again, 7 o'clock here on the Reader's Magnet Festival of Storytellers. So I'm going to be looking at the pages all this most of the time. So I'm going to share my screen with you, this one, and you can keep an eye on this. All right. The first excerpt is from The Old Man's Request. By car, the farm was only a few minutes away, and in the bright moonlight, the indicated driveway was marked by an old gate that had long since collapsed. Lamb moved the remains from the path before driving on. 2 parallel tracks ran through the tall grass, leading up to the more than old weather-beaten barn, a sagging cabin, and a toppled outhouse. One of the doors to the barn hung loosely from its hinges. The other had already fallen to the ground. From the driveway, they could see through the barn, past where the doors on the other end had also collapsed, to a stand of trees beyond. This doesn't appear that anyone has been here in a while, Lamb said. The cabin is in slightly better condition. At least the doors and windows appear intact, O'Malley said. They climbed out of the car, flashlights in hand, and made their way through the tall grass to the cabin. Contrary to the shopkeeper's warning, there were no signs of flies. Near the perimeter of the cabin, the grass had given way to bare dirt, packed hard by the summer heat. Together, the 3 circled the building, looking for anything noteworthy. There was a stairway down to the root cellar in the back, and 2 entrances to the ground floor, one in front and one in the rear. They selected the rear entrance. What do you make of these? O'Malley asked of Anna. He referred to carvings that wrapped around the frame of the door. The markings were faint and weathered. They circle the window on this side as well, Lamb added, after examining the window around the corner. He rejoined his friends. O'Malley had cleared away a portion with his handkerchief. They appear to be runes of some kind, the priest added, pointing out certain characters. These are crude renditions of Glagolitic characters. just like on the gold box, Anna said with a smile. They must be Brent Hankey's warning glyphs. Dr. Graham grasped the ancient-looking doorknob. To his surprise, the handle crumbled in his palm. He gave O'Malley and Rykov an incredulous look as he gently applied his weight to the door. The remainder of the doorknob mechanism crumbled, and the door fell inward. It landed against the table inside the cabin, which slid across the bare wooden floor with an eerie groan and a cloud of dust. Inside, the cabin was sparse. O'Malley picked up the door and leaned it against the wall to the right of the doorway as he entered. The faint smell of mildew permeated the air. He discovered more carvings on the inside of the door. The doctor passed him, shining his flashlight all around as he looked. He tapped Anna's shoulder as she entered and pointed to a trap door in the ceiling. The carved glyphs flowed around its wooden frame. The room they entered was a kitchen. A simple table with 2 chairs and a bench lay along the right side past a door into another room. There were glyphs around the frame of that door as well, on both sides. Along the outer wall was a hearth with an old Dutch oven resting on one side against the remains of a beam from which it once hung. The ashes beneath had long ago crumbled to dust. The priest was intrigued. He examined the fireplace, often the center of any historical site, and discovered the remnants of a recent fire, though the ash was cold to his touch. There were footprints in the ubiquitous dust. On the table, he found a box of matches and an open pocket knife with a stained blade. O'Malley lifted the blade to his face and examined the stains. They were reddish brown and dried. "I think that came from this," the anthropologist said, holding up an empty can of beans whose top had been crudely sawn off. She swirled the can in her hand and examined the insides. The remnants within were dried, but still sticky. "I think someone was staying here recently." Lamb produced a revolver from under his coat. "There's no need for that," Father O'Malley said pointedly. "Better safe than sorry," the doctor replied, taking the lead through the other door. The doorway led into the other ground floor room, which appeared to be a living room. The center of the room was empty, save for a well-worn rug. Along the walls lay an old sofa, some chairs, and a few coffee tables. The furnishings were stained and rotting. The wood floor was warped, and the mildew smell was strongest there. Stains in the ceiling indicated water damage, likely from leaks in the roof. "This place has seen better days," Lamb said with disdain. As he set his foot down beyond the threshold, the floor sagged, groaning ominously. He stopped before putting his full weight on it and withdrew. "I don't think that floor will support us, unless you want to give it a try," glancing at Anna, who was the smallest of the three. "I don't think that will be necessary," O'Malley said. He had peeked through the opening to examine the other side of the doorframe. The carving seemed to be concentrated around the kitchen. He looked at the front windows. "There are none on the front windows or door." The others glanced past him. "It seems that the kitchen was the focus of some kind of occult activity," Anna added. "In many cultures, fire is the focal point of activity and the collecting place for the life force of the family." Lamb rolled his eyes. Anna glowered at him. "If Longborough and his friends were going to conduct a ritual based on ancient texts, they would follow the steps by rote. That would include conducting it at the focal point for mystical energies." She examined the floor closely and carefully brushed aside some dust, revealing a faint indentation in the floorboards. "The remains of a summoning circle," she said confidently. "The carvings seem to be the same as the ones inside of all the exits from this room," O'Malley said after making a circuit of the room. He stepped outside. A moment later, he said, "And the markings on the outside of the window and the doors are the same, but not the same as the ones on the inside." In the meantime, Anna scanned the surviving shelves along the top of the room on either side of the outer door. On one, she noticed an old wooden cigar box. Standing on her toes, Anna retrieved the box and set it on the table. "There are no carvings around any of the doors or windows in the other room," the priest said, returning through the rear door. As he approached, Anna pulled a stack of yellowed papers from the cigar box and examined them. These appear to be Latin, she said, turning to give the priest a better look. As she did so, the doctor took a small metal canister resembling a snuff box from the cigar box. He examined it and then attempted to open the top. The top of the canister was sealed with age, but gave way with a pop, and Lamb was engulfed in a cloud of fine, silvery powder that immediately made his eyes burn slightly and his nose run. Putting his handkerchief to his face, the doctor gestured with his other hand to quickly leave the cabin through the door they had entered. Anna grabbed the cigar box before she was herded through the door by the priest, who held the papers. Lamb had the presence of mind to close the canister and put it in his pocket before following the others out and closing the door. "Get me home," the doctor said with urgency. "We don't know what that powder is, but it is quite unpleasant." Father O'Malley took the offered keys. Anna guided Lamb to the rear seat of the car and sat behind him. The priest started the car and took off down the drive. When they reached the general store again, O'Malley stopped the car and wet his handkerchief in the rain barrel. He returned to the car and Anna started to wipe the doctor's face. Lamb winced and grabbed her hand. He took the wet cloth, flipped it over to the clean side, and covered his eyes. "Let's get going," the doctor said after a calming breath. "We will take you to the hospital," Anna said. "No," the doctor replied with urgency. "I have what I need at home." Anna looked at him skeptically. "I don't want the administrator to deem me unfit for work." All right. So here we are, and there I am. Any questions so far? That was from the Old Man's Request, which is book 1 of the Utgarda trilogy. The next piece comes from The Missing Medium, which is book 2 of the trilogy. This is from The Missing Medium. It was nearly noon when Anna and Lamb found themselves on the steps leading up to the front door of a small 3-story house in the center of a row of identical houses. The lowest level was situated such that the barred windows flanked the brick staircase on either side. They were both sweating in Brooklyn's July heat, and Anna stopped Lamb from pressing the button for the doorbell so she could remove a mirror and some foundation from her purse to touch up the scars covering her face. She did not want to scare Mrs. Teplow. Before she finished, the two were overcome by a cloud of fragrance as the older woman opened the door. She was dressed in an elegant evening gown and held an unlit cigarette in a long holder. A large pendant hung from a necklace of shiny green stones that matched the dress. "Are you the man from the university?" she said to Lamb in a poorly concealed Brooklyn accent. She acknowledged Anna's presence with a brief nod. "Yes," Anna responded. "I am Dr. Eno Rykov, and this is Dr. Harold Lamb. We are from Reister University in Wellsburg." She held out her hand. The woman was flustered, but quickly regained her composure. "Of course," she replied. "I'm Maureen Teplow, Brian's mother." She took a deep breath and smiled. "Wow, a lady professor," she said in her natural Brooklyn accent. Then she nodded, collected herself, and gestured inside. "Won't you come in?" she added, attempting to hide her accent again. Anna and Lamb entered, and Mrs. Teplow directed them to a living room. Anna noted scratches in the floor, indicating where furniture had been moved recently. In the center of the room was a cherrywood coffee table on top of a tiger skin rug. 2 expensive-looking leather sofas, too large for the room and incongruous with the tiger skin, flanked it on either side. Anna took a seat on the sofa facing the fireplace. On the mantel were curios from around the world, including a jade vase and an ivory figurine of an elephant. On the wall nearest the front door stood a large gold-framed mirror that reflected the image of a famous oil painting that Anna recognized but could not identify, hanging on the opposite wall. Lamb walked around the back of the sofa and sat next to Anna. Mrs. Teplow returned from another room carrying a tray of finger sandwiches, as well as some crystal goblets and a matching decanter containing what looked like red wine. When she saw where her guests had sat, she grimaced, who then quickly adopted a gracious smile and set the tray on the coffee table. "May I pour?" she asked as she picked up the decanter and removed the stopper. "Mrs. Teplow," Anna said with a smile as she put her hand over the top of the goblet nearest her, "you do not need to impress us. We are normal people just like you." Lamb nodded with a smile. The older woman looked confused. Then she set the decanter and stopper down on the tray and slumped into the opposite sofa. All of her airs vanished, and the stressed, anxious woman beneath the facade was exposed. The doctor took a small notebook and pencil from his jacket pocket. "I've been so worried," Teplow said, her hands rising to her cheeks. "Brian has been missing for 2 weeks." She glanced from Anna to Lamb and back as the tears welled up in her eyes. "The police have had no leads, and they haven't told me anything in 3 days." She started to bite at a fingernail. "Tell us about Brian," Lamb said calmly. "When did his gift first appear?" The old woman visibly relaxed, having something else to talk about. "Brian was a normal boy," she said, looking about the room. "His father bought this house when I got pregnant. Of course, it wasn't this nice back then." "You have quite an eclectic collection," Anna said. When Teplow looked confused, she added, "Your furnishings are quite varied in style." "Well, yes," Teplow replied. "Brian bought me back things from all his travels." Her face grew tense again. "The trips he's taken since the second incident." "What kind of incident?" Lamb asked politely. "When Brian was 12, he collapsed and was unconscious in the hospital for almost 9 months. "What caused the collapse?" the doctor asked more urgently. "We never found out. He had started having bad dreams a few months before that. At first, he just tossed and turned, then he started talking in his sleep. One night, he started shouting. I came to him, and it looked like he was wide awake." She put her hand to her face, looking blankly forward. His eyes were wide open, and his face was a fearful sight. She started breathing heavily. Anna crossed to the other sofa, sat next to her, and gently took Mrs. Teplow's hand. That seemed to restore the woman's composure. All the while, Lamb wrote hastily in his notebook. "But he was asleep," the old woman continued. "He stopped shouting after a while and closed his eyes. But when he didn't wake up the next day, I called a doctor, and Brian was taken to Brooklyn Hospital." "And he was unconscious for 9 months?" Lamb asked in a professional tone. "He never woke up in all that time?" Teplow thought for a moment. She held Anna's hand tightly. "I think he came to a couple times," she said, "but not for a while. The first time was about a month later." She looked forward in contemplation. "Yeah, it was April 22nd, 1915. I remember it was almost midnight, and we would have had to leave the hospital if he didn't show any progress." She smiled. "He woke up just in time." "So Brian was allowed to stay in the hospital?" Anna asked. "Yeah, he was lucky. A specialist from Manhattan had heard about his case and instructed the hospital to keep him there." "What was his name?" Lamb asked. "It was Faber, Dr. Gabriel Faber." "And what was his interest?" the doctor continued. "He wanted to hypnotize Brian and write down what he talked about." "Indeed," Lamb said skeptically. Anna glanced at him disapprovingly. "Interesting," Anna said. "Dr. Faber is a psychiatrist?" "Yeah," Mrs. Teplow replied. "He was a colleague of Sigmund Freud," she added, visibly proud of this information. "And this Dr. Faber is dead?" Anna asked. "No," Mrs. Teplow replied. "He has an office in Manhattan. Brian went to see him there after his second episode. It was during one of those sessions with Dr. Faber that his gift appeared." "What happened?" Anna asked with interest. "Well, I wasn't there. Brian told me about it later." Mrs. Teplow looked to the ceiling for a moment, collecting her thoughts. "As I recall," she began, turning back to Anna, "Brian said that it was at the end of the session. Dr. Faber had just brought him back to wakefulness. Brian asked to see the pocket watch that he used to hypnotize him. When Brian took hold of the watch, he said the details about the doctor's father and grandfather, who they had never discussed, came to him. She glanced at Lamb with a look of astonishment. The doctor's expression remained neutral, but Anna was intrigued. What kind of details? She asked with interest. Brian said he knew birthdays. She strained to remember. I think he said he knew about Faber's dachshund Wurst, and that it was named after his childhood pet. These are all things that could have come up in their conversations, Lamb said dismissively. Or he could have researched them in advance of the session. Are you suggesting that my boy is a fraud? Mrs. Teplow fumed, all pretense of culture and civility gone. He knew the details about the doctor's childhood home in Germany that Faber had to contact relatives still there to verify. And this was the start of Brian's fabulous career, Anna said with enthusiasm to break the tension. Mrs. Teplow was disoriented for a moment before she turned back to Anna. Yeah, she replied with a smile. Somehow Woody Frank heard about it and signed Brian up for a management contract. Her enthusiasm waned. Of course, he then went on tour, first on the East Coast and then Europe, she sighed. He was gone for 3 years. Then a modest smile returned. He sent me all these nice things for each of his stops, she added, gesturing to the mismatched collection that filled the room. You said that Dr. Faber intervened when Brian awakened from the first incident, Lamb asked, and he continued to see your son after the second. When was the last time they had an appointment? I don't know, Mrs. Teplow replied evenly. Brian's been very busy. I haven't seen him myself in almost 6 months. She turned to Anna. I've had to settle for phone calls. The last one was about a month ago. Tell us about Brian, Anna said with a smile. As I said, Brian was a normal boy. The older woman relaxed, thinking of pleasant times. He was the shy and quiet type. Did he have a lot of friends? No, he didn't, she conceded. Not that he was strange or anything. He just wasn't outgoing. He had a couple of friends in school, but only a few, at least that I knew about. What did he like to do? Anna wanted to keep Mrs. Teplow talking. She knew from her field work that you had to prime the pump. Once people got comfortable talking, the real information would flow. What did he like to do? No, I just said that. Brian was a creative boy, she replied with an expression of motherly pride. He used to draw pictures and write stories, but he never shared them. Why was that? I think he was afraid of being embarrassed. He wrote them in locked journals and hid them under his mattress. Teplow grinned. At least until there was so many that he couldn't sleep in it, as it was so lumpy. Then he put them in his bookcase. They filled an entire shelf almost. Did you ever read them? The old woman looked sheepish. I didn't want to impose on his privacy, she started. But one time he fell asleep mid-sentence and the book was open on the bed next to him. She thought for a moment. He must have been 9 or 10. What had he written? Lamb asked, his interest suddenly piqued. It was some kind of fantasy about a city of devils. Anna was intrigued. A city of devils? I don't think he called them devils, but they seem so from his description. She squinted, thinking back to that time. If I remember right, he said that they were tall and had short, curved horns and hooved feet, and big eyes that glowed red in the light. Then an idea came to Teplow. You know, those books are still up there in his room. Do you want to see them? Yes, please, Anna replied with unconcealed enthusiasm. I would very much like to see what Brian wrote. And that was from the Missing Medium, the second book. All right. Hi, Joab. I've subscribed to your irregular rant. However, I'm not able to download The Lush of Liechtenstein and Sucker Punch. I'm only able to. I'll have to fix the links. You should be able to get all three of them, but there must be something going on there. So I will send them to you if I am unable to fix the links. That That website is always there, so you can go back to it later on and try it again. I'll fix that after the session today. Any thoughts on the old man's request or the missing medium? Or any comments about what I've read so far? The next piece is from The Other Realm, which is the final book in the Edgarda trilogy. And this is somewhere in the middle of it. Anna watched Sobak fall. The girl's arms flailed and her wide eyes locked on Anna's. Anna turned away before she hit the ground. "Control has got you!" A loud, strong voice shouted from below. Anna opened her eyes to see a muscular man dressed only in a fur-covered loincloth, holding Sobak in both arms. He sat upon a female shuffler, and a long, wide sword lay in a scabbard across his back. Lamb yanked on an arrow, but he did not budge, and a horned warrior bellowed as it peered out of the window after the girl. "Come on," Lamb said, grabbing Anna's arm as he headed toward the ladder. She looked back, noticing how handsome the bare-chested rider was, then shook her head vigorously to clear the thought and followed the doctor down the ladder. As she reached the bottom, Anna was amazed as Lamb drew and fired off 3 arrows in rapid succession. She followed their path and saw an arrow strike each of the horned warriors in the head. The muscle-bound warrior had dismounted, leaving the stunned Sobak on his mount's back, and was cleaving through the warriors that Lamb had shot, his two-handed sword slicing one of them in half. "Contral has dealt the final blow, so the kills are his," the swordsman shouted as he turned and winked at Anna. Sobak met Anna's gaze with a wide smile and mouthed, "Wow," and turned to admire the handsome warrior who saved her. "Contral will handle this," he said as he stormed into the cabin. There was a commotion, and the old woman climbed awkwardly out of a window, pushed from behind by her husband, who disappeared out of view back inside and then flew out the window himself. Then there was silence. The warrior emerged from the cabin carrying a dead pointy in each hand and one over his shoulder. He dumped them on the top of the other 3. Then he lifted Sobak off the shuffler. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her legs around his chest, and kissed him on the lips. The warrior politely pulled her away, set her down on her feet, and nudged her toward her mother, who ran to meet her with tears in her eyes. Her father surveyed the carnage all around in shock and stumbled toward the warrior. Anna and Lamb emerged from the barn and rushed to join them. "We are in your debt," the old man started to say sheepishly to the giant before him. "Nonsense!" the warrior shouted, and Anna realized that was his normal speaking voice. "There is no need for gratitude. Contral's purpose is to slay these foul beast men." "You are Contral?" Anna said, "the companion of Debro?" "Contral and Debro are blood brothers," the warrior shouted, smiling as he looked over Anna. "But they have not traveled together since Debro ran afoul of the wizard." "You mean Gobage," Lamb said. A brief look of annoyance shot across Contral's face as he turned from Anna to Lamb, but his infectious genealogy and confidence returned immediately. "Contral is not a friend of the wizard who has enchanted his friend and fellow traveler. His journeys have been lonely and dull these past few months." He smiled back at Anna again. "Until now. Perhaps this beautiful bloom brings a change of fortune with her." Sobak, forgotten by the others, puffed with disappointment at the handsome warrior's clear interest in her older sister. Contral looked down, smiled to the girl, and tousled her hair. She was not amused. "Nevertheless," her father said, we thank the gods for sending you to us." He looked disappointingly toward Anna and Lamb. "Thank you for killing these accursed beast men before they destroyed our home." Anna opened her mouth to speak, but Contral spoke first. "Contral could not have dealt with the foe were it not for the quick thinking of your daughter and the marksman from the barn." He took Lamb's arm in a gesture of camaraderie, Had they not seen to the girl, Contral would have had to delay his assault until they were safe. Still, the woman said, standing behind Sobek with her hands on the girl's shoulders, we owe you gratitude. You must accept a meal from us. The warrior glanced from the woman to the man, to Anna, to Sobek, and finally to Lamb, and then shrugged. If it pleases you, he said genially, Contral will dine, so long as this pretty young one sits with me. Sobek blushed and giggled, then broke free of her mother's grip, took the warrior's hand, and tried to lead him toward the door. But first we must deal with this mess. All right. That was from The Other Realm, Book 3 of the Utgarda series. Of the Utgarda trilogy, I should say. Those stories, again, are all linked. It's a trilogy after all. And they all revolve around Anna and Harold Lamb, the doctor, and Father O'Malley, the priest, in 1929 New York, mostly. That obviously was somewhere else. The next book is the first book in the Thule trilogy, Thule being the ancient Norse homeland that the Nazis claimed the Aryan race came from, or is descended from. But they were wrong. And in this book, Anna takes on a new mission. She has acquired stealth and assassin skills from her alter ego in the other realm that have come back to the real world with her. However, other things have come back too. Here is a section from The Hunter in the Shadows. Feldman continued considering Anna's dream while she researched their expected guest. They waited for him in Feldman's office at the Reister University Library. You said that the settlement you witnessed was dedicated to a giant crocodile man. That is correct. And his soldiers were human-sized crocodile men. Well, as you probably know, Sobek with an E was an Egyptian god with the body of a man and the head of a crocodile. Perhaps your subconscious linked the two names and put them together in your dream. Perhaps, Anna conceded. But that does not explain why the symbol, which is not an Egyptian style, nor how it appeared in my pocket. She thought for a moment and then added, and the Egyptian god had the body of a man and the head of a crocodile. The being in my dream and its minions were actual bipedal crocodiles. Cletus put his head in Anna's lap, a gesture of concern intended to distract her when she sensed that something was bothering her. Anna rubbed gently between his eyes, now an unconscious response, and the dog thumped his tail loudly against the table. The Leighton has been in the field for almost 9 years, Anna noted, but he has not published anything in all that time. My contacts at the Royal Society said that they had presumed him lost. They have had no communications from him since 1923. Several people sent to find out what happened to him never returned. He made contact a few months ago to arrange for a return to England. Claimed he had never seen anyone searching for him. You have no information as to why this British archaeologist wants to see you? Anna asked before sipping from a glass of water. I'm afraid not. His telegram was rather cryptic. Must have cost a fortune from the Yucatan. He is coming from Central America, Anna said, swallowing the water in her mouth before she sprayed it across to death. She collected herself. I had assumed he was somewhere in the United States already. Where did he dock? Leighton didn't convey his travel arrangements. The telegram arrived here yesterday. Yesterday evening, Feldman pulled a sheet from his desk and handed it to Anna. The message had been sent from the British government house in Belize City 3 weeks earlier. It read, Dr. E. Feldman, Lomborough Foundation, Wellersburg, New York. Urgent matter. Needs special talents. Arrive by noon train, Wednesday, 3:10:30. Dr. C. Leighton. Something nagged at the back of Anna's mind. How did Leighton know exactly when he would arrive in Wellersburg? It was unlikely that every leg of his journey would be on schedule, even if he made all of his connections. Something was very odd about this fellow. Anna's assessment of her visitor was correct. She started when Cletus emitted a low growl. The round, balding older man she had met in her dream had appeared at Feldman's door, dressed in a suit of scraps and patches in mismatched colors and fabrics, and a derby hat. Anna had to contain herself lest she break out in laughter, but the dog bristled. "Dr. Feldman," the man said in an unusual English accent, wary of Cletus's hostility. "I am Dr. Cornelius Leighton of the Royal Society." Feldman glared at Anna and then stood and met the man at the door. "Eliza Feldman," he said, "at your service. And this is Dr. Anna Rykov." Leighton paused for a moment as if frozen. Then he regarded Anna coldly, almost clinically. He dropped the duffel bag on the floor with a thump and sat in Feldman's other guest chair. "Your costume is most distinctive," Anna said, still fighting to stifle her amusement. "I hope that you are not attempting to be unobtrusive." The newcomer did not seem to understand her comment. "I've traveled a long way," Leighton said with irritation after a moment, "by a most circuitous route to avoid detection by a most dangerous adversary." He turned to Feldman and was about to speak when Anna said, "Are you referring to Wolfram von Junst?" At the mention of the name, Leighton stood and backed himself into a corner. Cletus rose in response, and Anna tightened her grip on his leash. Leighton froze and then glanced from Cletus to Anna to Feldman and back to Anna. "You're in league with him. You're in league with him, aren't you?" he said in disbelief. "I have no knowledge of him," Anna said, "aside from both you and he appearing in a dream of mine last night. In it, you and I were allies against von Junst. I had shot him and was in pursuit." Leighton seemed to gaze through Anna for a long moment. It was almost as if he was speaking a different language, and he had to interrupt what he said. Anna and Feldman held their positions and waited, studying the man in return. Then the Englishman slowly returned to his seat, wary of Cletus. "What do you know of von Junst?" "I read one of his journals," Feldman replied. "In one of the journals that Dr. Wolfram von Junst, an archaeologist representing the German Thule Society, had discovered the existence of a prehistoric civilization that occupied the Yucatan Peninsula before the Mayans." "That is not so noteworthy. There were many tribes in that area before the Mayan supremacy there. Von Junst claims," Feldman said with a flourish, "that the evidence he found suggests beings that preceded the dinosaurs. Surely he must be referring to Neanderthals. It is widely believed that they hunted for mammoth and competed with saber-toothed tiger. From what I've uncovered," Feldman continued, "von Junst believes that he found the remains of reptilian beings that existed in the Paleozoic era, 400 or 500 million years ago." During the conversation, Leighton had sat quietly, observing the other two intently. It gave Anna an uncomfortable feeling that Cletus sensed. Finally, Anna stood up, holding Cletus back, and confronted Leighton. "Why are you here?" she demanded. The newcomer did not immediately react to Anna. "I could ask you the same," Leighton finally replied. He turned to the librarian. "Dr. Feldman, why is Dr. Rykov and that animal present for our conversation?" "You mentioned in this telegram," Feldman said, holding out the paper, "that you required special talents. Dr. Rykov possesses such skills. Before you tell us why you sought me out, please tell us how you came to be aware of the Longborough Foundation for Ethnographic Research. We've only been in existence for a few months." "We have common acquaintances," Leighton replied after a furtive moment. "Who?" the librarian countered. Leighton froze again, as if dazed. "It is best they remain anonymous for their own safety," Leighton responded. Feldman was not satisfied, but he did not pursue the matter. Dr. Leighton, what can the Foundation do for you? The librarian asked pointedly. All right. The Englishman stiffened at Feldman's direct question. Again, he froze for a moment before responding. To begin with, I am not Dr. Cornelius Leighton. Anna braced herself to respond to anything unfriendly. Cletus responded to her attention with a low growl. That is to say, this is the body of Dr. Cornelius Leighton, but the intelligence with whom you are speaking is not. You're claiming that to be something that has possessed his body. Exactly, the Englishman replied, seemingly oblivious to the librarian's tone. Mine is a race of scholars who travel through time and space, learning about the multiverse by exchanging our own bodies back in our time with those beings whose existence we wish to study. He eyed Cletus nervously. Please contain your animal. I would not wish my host's body to be damaged. Why should we believe you? Anna said. Leighton froze again. When he revived again, he looked at Anna appraisingly. You are the agent of the Junaji, he said. You are the one who released Utgara. Anna hid her surprise. How could you possibly know that? Feldman said with astonishment. My race shares a collective consciousness, he replied. What one sees, all experience. He turned to Anna. You encountered one of my kind in the astral projectionist's domain. Anna's eyes narrowed. You are the ancient enemy, she hissed. My kind are not in opposition to the Junaji, Leighton explained. Our purpose is only to learn. The Junaji seek to hoard knowledge. We exist to cross purposes. But you steal the lives of those who you exchange bodies with, Anna spat. Your method may be temporary, but your subject still has no choice. After his usual momentary pause, Leighton said, While it is true that we do not ask for the consent of our guests, the collective does not suppress their consciousness and steal their bodies. We place our own bodies in their care and offer them access to all that we have learned over countless millennia. How do you select beings to swap with? The subjects must bring themselves to our attention. Leighton froze again, this time for an extended period. Anna and Feldman glanced at each other. When he was again present, the Englishman said, In the case of your species, our guests have been scholars of advanced mathematics, what you might call magic, or occultists, Feldman added, pausing to consider this. Why do you pause before you speak? I am in contact with the collective, Leighton replied. But my communication experiences a delay across time and space between us. I have consulted the collective consciousness in order to respond to your queries. So you exchange minds with individuals involved with the occult. So you exchange minds with the individuals involved with the occult. Anna was concerned, which we consider to be dangerous and share with them secrets otherwise beyond their access. Interesting, Leighton said. Your response to this free exchange of information is to suppress it. He paused again and then said, I see. You believe those who pursue such inquiries to be beyond your species' acceptable norms of behavior. We call that insanity, Feldman said pointedly. And in most cases, people who pursue the occult arts have motives contrary to the well-being of our species, our world, and our universe. One of the goals of the Lomboro Foundation is to investigate and address these threats. And that is why I sought you out, Leighton said with finality. All right. Well, that is from The Hunter in the Shadows. The Hunter in the Shadows, which is book 1 of the Tule trilogy. Now, in that trilogy, and it comes to the attention of some powerful people, including J. Edgar Hoover. And when runes similar to those she discovered during her fieldwork in the Ukraine and saw in her dream of Central America are discovered in northern England, she is secreted away to England under cover of night and a Zeppelin to investigate. This comes from the worlds that from the worlds I know, which is the second book in the Thule trilogy. After Anna's second cup of tea, the butler reappeared. "All ready to see you now, miss." The wing commander and the inspector both rose to accompany her, but the butler held up his hand. "They wish to interview Dr. Rakoff in private." Anna turned to her companions and raised an eyebrow. "I am sure it will be fine, gentlemen," she said, then preceded the butler from the room. At the parlor door, the butler knocked before opening it. "Dr. Rakoff," he said as Anna entered the room. She approached the cluster of men who all remained seated and stopped before the assembly. There were no available chairs. "Now, Dr. Rakoff," the Home Secretary Klein said, "my colleagues tell me that prior to last summer you were an unemployed doctor of archaeology specializing in Western Russia. How does this relate to the discovery in Crackpot?" "If you'll excuse me, Mr. Home Secretary, but if I may correct you, my doctorate focused on the study of the Varangians, who are the Vikings who traveled the rivers of Eastern Europe in the 9th through 11th centuries." Yes, Kleins interrupted. "But what do Russian Vikings have to do with ruins in northern England, and why are you specifically so knowledgeable of relevant information when credible sources here in England are not?" "As your colleagues will attest, sir, academic research and fieldwork yield very different results. In my fieldwork along the Dnieper River, I discovered some artifacts bearing unique runes. These characters were not related to Norse iconography or any writing systems of any other culture known to have inhabited that region. As I was only a graduate student at the time, and this discovery was not of interest to the project leader, that would be Dr. Alexei Sergeyevich Yuvanov." "Yes," Anna continued, ignoring the interruption. "Professor Yuvanov was the leading authority on the Varangians and was teaching at Columbia University at this time. He was subsequently denounced as a Western-sponsored agitator and recently executed," the admiral inserted. "Yes," Anna said, growing slightly annoyed. "Mr. Hoover informed me of the professor's demise." "And how is it that you came to Mr. Hoover's attention?" Colonel Kell asked in an unexpectedly conversational tone. "Last winter I was investigating a series of disappearances among homeless occupants of Boston Common." Anna gave the Home Secretary a stern look to stave off his interruption and then continued. "Mr. Hoover thought that my inquiries might jeopardize an official investigation that was already in progress. And in spite of Mr. Hoover's personal and professional opinions," Colonel Kell asked, again in a pleasant collegial tone, "he confided in you, a Russian and a Jew." Yes, Colonel Kell. "Mr. Hoover had found nothing to suggest that I was untrustworthy or a security risk. In fact, it was Mr. Hoover who alerted us that the Longborough Institute of the developments in Crackpot." "Yes," Assistant Commissioner Bingham said, "and it was Hoover's man, Lieutenant Shroud, who insisted that we bring you in on this matter. How are you acquainted with the lieutenant?" "Lieutenant Shroud assisted me in the Boston matter." "Let us get back to the matter at hand," Colonel Kell said, continuing the congenial tone that was incongruous with the evident hostility of the others. "Dr. Rykov, why should we sanction your assistance with this matter of the ruins discovered in Crackpot? As I was saying earlier, the ruins I discovered in the Dnieper Valley, while not relevant to Professor Uvanov, were intriguing. I made some rubbings of them that I brought back to New York with me. In my subsequent studies, I have only uncovered 3 accounts of similar runes. The first that was found in Belize by Dr. Leighton. The second is on the doorway uncovered in Krakow. On the third, Bingham asked pointedly, the third account was in the dream journals of a New York spiritualist and medium, Anna said in a professional tone. Mr. Teplo had drawn many landscapes from his dreams featuring these runes, as well as an image that is nearly identical to the door in the photograph. I was not given advance notice of this investigation, and I was only supplied a very blurry wire photo image. Had I seen the documents provided to me on the voyage here prior to departure, I could have brought a copy of Mr. Teplo's drawings as well as my rubbings from the Ukraine. So you're saying that this door, Kell said, holding up a copy of the photograph retrieved from one of his files, was depicted in this mystic's dreams, that he drew a facsimile of it, and that the characters on this drawing match both those he found in Russia and those that Dr. Leighton found in Central America. And you claim that this system of writing has no relationship to any of the cultures or civilizations that inhabited any of those regions. That is correct. The origin of this system of symbols is currently the subject of my research. Then it would appear that Dr. Rykov is indeed the expert required for this inquiry, the assistant commissioner said. Does this address your concerns as to Dr. Rykov's qualifications, gentlemen? Kell asked the other. You have said very little, Lord Byng. I've been considering the testimony, the police commissioner said. And while I don't find this mystic mumbo-jumbo credible, I would prefer that this matter not be pursued by the Metropolitan Police, with the exception of supervision by a special branch. Professor Hyland will chaperone Dr. Rykov for the duration of her activities in the United Kingdom. Hardly a rousing endorsement, my lord, but if that is the recommendation of the Metropolitan Police, the Secret Intelligence Service, and the Security Service that this matter proceed, I will authorize it, the Home Secretary Klein said. So Traveler will receive regular reports from Inspector Hyland, Klein continues, and I expect regular updates in the scheduled briefing packet. He gazed at Anna intently for a moment and then said, Thank you, Dr. Rykov, that will be all. When Anna returned to the day room, Wing Commander Twistleton Wickham Fines was gone. Inspector Hyland had switched from tea to scotch and was pouring a measure from a crystal decanter as she entered. Would you care for a drink, Dr. Rykov? He said as he poured a second glass. Normally I would prefer to eat something before consuming spirits, Anna said, accepting the drink. Today, however, I will make an exception. For a distinguished gentleman, Anna said as she sat on a couch, they were rather rude. I was roused from bed in the middle of the night and whisked away to Montreal to catch a Zeppelin to England, only to have my qualifications questioned. Those were no distinguished gentlemen. That was the spy master and the chief of the secret police with his bulldog advising the wolf in the woolen. What did they decide anyway? They have agreed to let me pursue the matter they brought me here for, but under your supervision. And you will be expected to make regular reports to your supervisors, from which the Home Secretary himself will receive a briefing. It seems like an awful lot of scrutiny for an unusual archaeological discovery. Welcome to His Majesty's England, lass, the inspector said as he raised his glass. Anna drank without replying. All righty. So that was from The Worlds That I Know, which is the most recently published book. Let's see. We only have 5 more minutes here, so I'm not going to read the other 2, which are currently unpublished. I'll save them for Wednesday. But while we're here, does anybody wish to ask any questions? Once again, if you were listening this afternoon, I mentioned that I am running a contest to run a role-playing game on Roll20, the online tabletop site, for a winner and their friends. The winner will be selected on November 27th. That's the Saturday after Thanksgiving. And the link to enter the contest is listed there, https://rotf.lol RPG contest. Additionally, if you wish to subscribe, if you subscribe to my newsletter at joabstieglitz.com/subscribe, you'll receive links to some short stories. As reported, 2 of those links don't appear to be working right now, but I will fix that after we end the session. So, does anybody have anything they'd like to ask before we call it a night? All right. Well, I will fix the links as soon as I get off the session here. All right. Well, okay, folks. I will be back. Why do you have a priest in the trio? Right. Well, as I mentioned, the story was based on a campaign that I ran for Call of Cthulhu in the 90s. And all of the protagonists were characters in that game. Actually, in the game, there were 8 protagonists. I trimmed it down to 3. Anna, Dr. Lamb, and Father O'Malley were 3 of the characters my friends were playing. And they seem to have and as players, they seem to have the most interest in the game. And their characters provided a nice counterpoint to each other. One was a scientist, one was a folklore expert, and one was a priest whose specialty or whose training was with the Vatican's leading exorcist. So just kind of, and I didn't write those backgrounds, the players who created the characters did. So they just fit well together. So as I said earlier, I will be back on Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, 3:30 Eastern Time, and again at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. At 7 p.m. I will be doing some more readings. So I hope to see you then. And until then, have a wonderful day and a pleasant evening.